Good evening, everybody. My name is Todd Scholl. I'm the lead learner at the SCEA's Center for Educator Wellness and Learning. Tonight, we have some special guests with us, and I'm really excited and interested to learn from these folks tonight. Just as some background knowledge, today the House passed H5183-5183, the AntiTruth Education Censorship Bill. And because the bill didn't make crossover for the Senate to even consider the bill and assign it to a committee, 2/3 of the senators would have to vote yes to consider the bill. If you want to take action, you can call your senator and tell them to vote no on 5183. And we're going to put a link in the comments so you can go directly to find out who your legislators are and what their contact information is. But without further ado, I want to introduce tonight's guest. I'm going to go in alphabetical order. Chanda Jefferson, who I consider a friend and a colleague. She is the Albert Einstein Distinguished Educator Fellow and also the 2020 South Carolina Teacher of the Year. Welcome, Chanda.
Hey, everyone.
And then we have Miriam Rollin, who is the Director of the Education Civil Rights Alliance. Joining us in just a little bit is Mary Smith, who is the SCEA's SCORE chairperson, and SCORE stands for the South Carolina Organization of Remarkable Educators. And last but not least is Natasha Wilkins, who is the Educator Engagement Coordinator for the Education Civil Rights Alliance. So I would like to welcome all of you and thank you so much for your time and for paying close attention to this very important issue. And I'm just going to turn it on over to Natasha and let you just take it away from here.
Yeah, thanks so much, Todd. And hi, everybody. This conversation, I feel like, is coming at a really great time, a really pivotal time. Great, because we need more conversations like these happening. Wish it was under different circumstances that we didn't have these bills requiring these conversations, but this is a really timely conversation for us to have right now. So there are a lot of bills being passed and a lot of conversation about what is happening in classrooms that is happening all over the country. South Carolina is no exception. But a lot of these legislative conversations about what can and cannot be taught in the classroom are happening without teacher voices being a part of the conversation, or without educator voices at large being part of the conversation. And so these are things that impact educators' careers, they impact our careers, they impact our passions, and educator voices need to be a part of that. So I say we because I'm a former educator. I feel like once an educator, always an educator. When you're in the classroom, even though you step out, like really, that's still, your heart is still there. You still love the kids and you still want to do what's right by kids. And so I went from the classroom to law school, trying to, again, make things right for kids. And then from there, went to the Illinois State Board of Education, is where I was doing my agency work and doing resource equity. And now I'm in this advocacy space, still advocating and making sure that policies are passed with kids in mind. And I feel like a lot of these bills that we're going to be talking about today are not doing what's best for kids. And so we really want to make sure educators are educated so they can advocate for their students. Because who knows more about the education space and what students need than educators, the people who are with them every single day. And so that's why I think this conversation is really important. Chanda, would love to hear your thoughts about why you wanted to be a part of this.
Yeah, I'm so grateful to be here. I love home. So it's like, hey, y'all, I'm so happy to be here tonight to participate in this conversation because it's very important. And it's important knowing that as the South Carolina Teacher of the Year and a veteran teacher of South Carolina, I taught in an urban school, I taught in a suburban school, I taught in a rural school. And I know that one of the most effective instructional strategies to ensure our students are successful for the future is being able to see themselves in the curriculum, right? Like when we see ourselves, whenever we're able to connect to that curriculum, that is when we kind of see what we can be in the future. It prepares us for college and career readiness. It causes us to engage in that critical thinking and dialogue and all of those things that are necessary for our students in South Carolina to be productive citizens. So I'm here to be a part of the conversation to ensure this type of instruction can continue to happen, and that students, when they step into the classroom, they can feel like they belong. All of our students feel like school is a place for them to come and learn and explore and prepare them for the future, and also for our teachers to be able to have the tools and the language that they need to advocate for this type of instruction. We know what's best for kids. Teachers, we're professionals. We've been trained in this space. We've gone to school for several years. Many of our teachers, bachelor's, master's, even doctoral degrees to teach their content area. So, when we have things that come up against us, such as laws and policies, what we can do about it as teachers, how we can raise our voice. So I'm here just to talk about some of those tools, and I'm so happy to be a part of this panel.
Thanks for that, Chanda. Miriam, well, before I go to Miriam, I'll just add that to what Chanda is saying, that we're talking about teaching truth. And the goal of the information that we're going to share is to encourage educators to elevate your voices in this space, and to advocate again for what you know is right for students. So I do want to just name that we're not advocating for any political position. We're just advocating for truth in the classroom. That is all that we are advocating for. And so whatever is truthful, whatever allows students to get an honest and accurate education, that is what we want to see happen. That is what we want to empower and equip educators to be able to do. So one more thing I want to name is that there is a part of this conversation, or you may hear legislation referred to as anti-CRT legislation. We're not going to be using that term because, again, this is just about honest, accurate education. Students need to know what happened in the past. They need to, as Chanda said, be able to see themselves in the present and what they're learning. And so that is all that we are advocating for. And so Miriam, can you share a little bit about the Education Civil Rights Alliance and why we wanted to have this conversation?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks so much. Thank you, Todd, for hosting. Thank you, Chanda and Natasha, for sharing your thoughts. I just want to give a little background. So the Education Civil Rights Alliance, which I have the privilege of directing, was convened by the National Center for Youth Law. So NCYL, as it's known, has been around over 50 years now. It's a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization, and we try to advance justice and amplify youth power and dismantle racism. And we utilize a variety of strategies. We utilize research and policy advocacy and litigation and coalition building. And anyway, lots of different tools in our toolbox to try and make a difference for the lives of marginalized children in particular. And the Education Civil Rights Alliance has been around since 2017. We have been working to utilize policy advocacy and litigation and other strategies to try and ensure that marginalized children get the education that they need and deserve. And at the beginning of ECRA's creation, we knew that a bunch of policy advocates and a bunch of litigation advocates alone could not make the change happen that needed to happen. We needed to partner with educators. And so we joined with some really amazing folks, our leading educator ambassadors for equity, to figure out how do we partner with educators effectively in ensuring education equity in schools across the country. And so I'm really thrilled to be working with educators, thrilled to be working with the SCEA on this effort. So thanks for having us.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we're gonna dive into a little bit of more of the facts around what's happening with this legislation. Again, the goal of this is to empower educators to know what's happening and to be able to effectively advocate for what students need. And so I'm going to put this in presenter mode. Yeah. So a while ago, we held a conference and we had the opportunity to hear from educators from across the country. And we asked them this question: what 3 words come to mind when you think of culturally responsive education? And this is what they said. You can see the biggest word there is inclusive. And that's really what we want to do. We want to create an educational space that is inclusive of all of our students, of all backgrounds, of all races, gender, identities, everything. We want to make sure that each of our students, as we said, they have those windows and mirrors, windows where they can see into the lives of others and understand better what ways and cultures that are not like theirs are like. And then mirrors where they can see themselves reflected in their education as well and know that this education is for you, you do belong here. And really this legislation attacks that. And so that is, again, why we really want to make sure educators are aware and understanding that the current legislation, and again, that H 5183, which is the one that we're going to focus a little more on, that is a direct threat to making sure our students have the kind of education that we see reflected here by this word cloud, again, created by educators as to what we want to see for our students. And so, Miriam, can you talk a little bit about just the national landscape of what this legislation is looking like?
Yes, thank you, Natasha. And, culturally responsive education, it would be great if we were in a place where we already had that everywhere. We don't yet. Our kids aren't yet fully getting everywhere the culturally responsive, gender responsive, inclusive education that they really need and deserve. But unfortunately, since 2021, a number of states have actually been moving in the wrong direction. In fact, there were enactments in 2021 in 9 states, including South Carolina, through an add-on to the budget bill. So it didn't even get the full treatment of hearings and process and consideration. It just was thrown into a budget bill in the session last year. You'll hear a little more about that in a minute. Also in 2021, a number of state boards of education or state attorney general actions on this topic happened in an additional 7 states. Also, thankfully, in 2021, bills in North Carolina and Pennsylvania were vetoed, and one bill was overturned by the courts in Arizona. But this year, in 2022 so far, we're tracking legislation that impedes teaching truth in over half the states, including South Carolina. Again, you'll hear about what's pending in a moment. There have been enactments already this year so far in 6 states, including some of you may have heard about Florida and Georgia. There's also been administrative action by the governor in Virginia, the new governor, and also a bill was passed but vetoed in Wisconsin. So, if we could look at the next slide. So, what do these bills actually look like in general? Well, I'm going to give just the national picture of what they look like. So there's a number of things prohibited by these bills, and some of the terminology is on this slide. So things like Natasha mentioned, CRT, critical race theory, 1619 project, divisive concepts, systemic racism, white privilege. These are things that are supposedly divisive, that are not allowed to be talked about under a number of these bills. Unconscious or implicit bias is prohibited in some of the bills. Non-binary pronouns, race or sex stereotyping. So sometimes there's really vague language, like anything that causes guilt or anguish to persons solely because of their race or sex, which, how do you enforce that? Unfortunately, in addition to having this really overbroad array of undefined and confusing terms, these bills also have an impressive array of punishments for violations of these laws that can include sanctions against educators, fines, personnel actions, civil liability, even in one case, criminal liability, also against schools or districts, so fines, removal of state funds, etc. And there's also an equally impressive and unfortunate array of gotcha mechanisms in a number of these bills. So things like tip lines, Virginia is kind of famous for that in the administrative action this year. Requirements to post every book, material, lesson plan online in advance. And then even in some cases, video surveillance or in-person surveillance of teachers in the classroom doing their jobs every day. So many of these bills would create huge burdens on teachers and schools, districts, superintendents, school boards, and create review processes, complaint processes, just all these bureaucratic processes that really could end up having education just stop in its tracks. And all of this has resulted in things like book banning in some places, even in one place, book burning. Teacher firings have happened, and most widespread and maybe most troubling is self-censorship. So because these bills are so vague, because they're creating such a culture of fear, everyone's like, oh, I guess I better not talk about race in the classroom. Oh, I guess I better not talk about gender in the classroom. Oh, I guess I better not talk. And that self-censorship is just creating huge harm to the students who, again, aren't going to see themselves in the curriculum, aren't going to understand others as a result of what they're learning in school. So with that, I will turn it back to Natasha to give a South Carolina specific picture of what's passed and what is pending.
Thanks, Miriam. So yeah, what about South Carolina? Miriam just gave us that general overview of what's happening across the country. So as she mentioned, in South Carolina for the 2021-2022 school year, there were limitations passed in the Appropriations Act, and that's the bill that approves the budget. So let's look at first, what does the act say? So that act says that no money given to schools and school districts can be used to, and these are some of the things on the list Miriam just went through, but cannot be used to show that an individual by virtue of his race or sex is inherently racist, sexist, or oppressive, whether consciously or unconsciously. So that's that conscious or unconscious bias piece. And they can also these funds cannot be used to teach that an individual should feel guilt, anguish, or any other form of psychological distress on account of his race or sex, which no one is teaching that people should feel that way anyway. But that has been construed to mean if a child goes home and says that they feel bad about what happened in the past, then that is a problem. So what did the language of the Appropriations Act not say? It did not prohibit any professional development or training for teachers related to issues of addressing unconscious bias within the context of teaching certain literary or historical concepts or issues related to the impacts of historical or past discriminatory policies. So this is something that's a little different than some of the national bills. This bill did specifically say teachers can still be trained to understand these things, but then you can't go in your classroom and talk about it. So yeah. And then what does the act impact? So one thing to keep in mind about what was passed for 2021-2022 for the school year, this only applied to state funds allocated by the South Carolina State Department of Education to school districts. It did not apply to local funds. And it's set to expire June 30th of this year. I will add that although this is set to expire, it is up for renewal. So there does still need to be a legislative push from educators to say, hey, this bill, what's in the Appropriations Act, this is actually not beneficial for our students or us. It doesn't make our students stronger. It doesn't make our state better. It's not preparing our students better for the future. And so we don't want this to be repassed for the next appropriations cycle. And one thing to note is that it did not change any standards. So the South Carolina state standards were still fully intact. The history standards were not changed by this. But again, as Miriam was talking about, it does create that chilling effect of what can I say and what can I not say? And that is really the big harm of these bills. Educators don't know what they can say and what they can't say. What will I get in trouble for? What will pass muster? And so we are advocating that these bills all together just need to go. They're not beneficial. So looking at this legislative session, so that was what passed last year. What are we looking at now this year? So there were 5 anti-truth bills that were proposed in South Carolina this legislative session. What was included in some of these bills? They had things like requiring public school websites to provide a detailed list of all instructional materials and curricula used in the school. These bills contained things that would minimize the history and perspective of Black Americans and Native Americans in South Carolina classrooms. And they also had language that would prohibit requiring professional development, training, or courses that cover concepts that, again, we see this language that may result in an individual feeling discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any other form of psychological distress based on race or sex. And this one would prohibit professional development. So the current language or the current Appropriations Act did not prohibit professional development training. This would impact what educators can learn before going into the classroom. And so most of these bills were defeated. There is still one, and that we mentioned earlier, H 5183, that is still on the table. So of the 5, there is now one that is remaining that is really of concern. The language of H 5183 does still contain some of these things. A lot of what was in the others that were defeated has now been brought into 5183. And again, it did not pass crossover. And what that means is that there is a day where bills that originate in the House, by which they have to get over to the Senate in order to continue moving forward in the legislative session. This bill did not meet that threshold. It didn't make it to that point. However, as with many things, there was a loophole. There's a way to still get it passed, even if it didn't make crossover day. And that's what's happening right now. It's now been passed in the House. And if 2/3 of the Senate vote to approve it, then it can still be passed, even though it didn't make it to crossover. So what is the big concern with 5183? I'm going to tell you a little bit about how this could potentially impact educators. So the potential impact on educators if this passes is that when a parent files a report, this bill says that that parent should include the name of the educator, and that could place the educator's safety at risk. So if a parent says an educator is teaching one of these divisive concepts, here's the educator's name, and then that educator's name would be made public. That we don't want that to happen. While this bill does provide protection for parents and students, it excludes any right to representation, appeal, or due process for educators who could be sent through a lengthy discipline process between the local education agency and the South Carolina Department of Education. So again, it denies educators due process. That is not beneficial. That's not what's good for educators, and that's not what's good for our students. And I'll also name that right now there is a national teacher shortage. And if educators don't feel protected in the classroom, how are we going to make sure that we have educators there to teach our students?
That's right.
And so there's just a lot of things in this bill that are not beneficial for making sure our students have access to healthy and wholesome and honest education. If you can't talk about where many of your students come from, or if they come to you with a question about what's happening in the world, can you answer it? Can you not? Again, that self-censorship is what is going to occur from these bills. But not everything is bad. So I know that was a lot of really heavy information, and we wanted to make sure that we bring some hope into this, because we're not here to say it is hopeless. It's definitely not hopeless. Educator voices can change this. Again, this is why we wanted to do it. And so, Chanda, I'm going to turn it to you to remind us of who's backing us, because educators, we are supported.
Yes, I'm so excited to be able to share this data with you all. I'm a scientist, so I'm going to show you guys some data that shows that, we're celebrating these educator wins by this polling that's in the news and through research articles. So you guys can see that in this CBS News polls that book bans are not supported by the public. It says, should books ever be banned for criticizing U.S. history? And you guys see the public says no. Political ideas you disagree with, and the public says no. Depicting slavery, no. 87% says no. And even discussing race. So these are conversations, this is healthy dialogue that our students need to participate in. And there's even a law that talks about the importance of teaching African-American history. It's a part of the South Carolina law to this day, and it dates back to several years back. So that's important for us to know. And if you go on to the next slide, continuing to celebrate educator wins. Sometimes it might feel like educators are alone, but once again, this polling is showing through the Heart Research Association that the parents' rating of teachers' performance has historically been strong and has grown even more positive. So looking back at the April 2010 data, the quality and performance of teachers in public schools, you see it has risen from 62% good and excellent all the way up to December 2021 at 78%. So parents think that the quality and performance of teachers in public schools is great and it is excellent. And just kind of going over to this other graph on the right-hand side, parents give their children's teachers high marks on a wide range of performance matrix. So I'm going to dive into some of these performance matrix and qualifications. So describes teachers as very well and fairly well in knowing the subject matter very well, 90%. So our teachers are trained, we're professionals. We know what we're doing in the classroom, highly qualified teachers. We care about our children. During the pandemic, that was shown. Teachers were more concerned about students continuing to have their education and their curriculum more than their well-being and themselves. We saw that, not saying that that's right, but teachers really care about the children. They're on the same team as the parents. So we partner with our parents to ensure that we're doing everything that we can to ensure that our students are successful, and communicating with parents. I know that went up during the pandemic. It says 80% describes teachers doing this very well or fairly well. We tapped into technology, remind.com, Remind 101. Some parents call teachers on the phone during this time period. We know how it is to make sure that we keep that two-way communication with our parents. So educators are definitely winning in this spectrum. And I even have one more set of statistics as well from Heart Research Associates.
And I'll add, Chanda, to this graphic about parents' ratings of teachers. Like you said, that went up during the pandemic. When things were the hardest, parents were respecting teachers and beginning to have an even more positive review of the people who were working with their students every single day in what has been likely the hardest season for the vast majority of educators.
Absolutely.
Parents are not, they're not blind to that. They are seeing that. And so for me as an educator, that gives me so much hope that parents know that educators really are trying to do what is right for kids. And so that also tells me that the individuals who are promoting this legislation, I'm not sure who they're talking to or where they're getting their information about what's happening in schools, but the people whose children are in our classrooms every day, they're not aligning with what we're hearing. So
yeah, that's so true, because I remember, the post on social media about parents saying, how do you guys sit with 20 or 30 of students like mine, teaching them in a classroom, because I'm struggling with just my two. So praising and celebrating teachers. So we know that this data, once again, is just continuing to show and celebrate teachers. So this data shows, or these graphs shows parents are satisfied with the curriculum and communication, but somewhat less with parents' voice and politics in the classroom. So the first graph on the left-hand side, it shows that parents are very satisfied or fairly satisfied with the classroom curriculum that their child is studying in the classroom, and that they're also satisfied with communication with parents about academics and the curriculum. and, moving over, that they're satisfied with keeping politics out of the classroom as well. And that the amount of them say, or the amount say that parents have, the amount of what they say parents have and what children are being taught. So just the information that the curriculum that students are being taught is 65% of parents that are satisfied with that. And over on to the pie chart here, teachers generally stick to the appropriate factual content and the academic information that they're supposed to teach. So in South Carolina curriculum, y'all, CRT is not a part of our standards. And teachers are teaching the curriculum because we're preparing students for the test, we're preparing students for the future, but mainly we want our kids to be successful. So we're sticking to the curriculum guidelines that have been given to us.
And I'll add to that, Chanda, that as we're thinking about how educators can really make sure their voices are heard in this space, you can't argue with the data. The data shows that parents don't feel like their children are learning things that they should not be learning. And that's really what this legislation says it's attacking. It says that parents don't know what their kids are learning and that kids are learning things that parents don't agree with. And this shows the exact opposite of that. So as an educator, I feel super encouraged by this. I can go into a legislative session and say, parents are actually saying they like what we're teaching. They know what we're teaching. So point me to data that shows something different, because what I'm seeing does not align with what I'm hearing as the reason for promoting this legislation. And I believe that is the end of our slideshow. We can talk a little bit more about what's happening in this teaching truth space.
Well, it's a brilliant presentation. Thank you so much for all of that information and eye-opening data there. And I would suggest that that data exists in a climate where many parents are turning on the news and hearing news stories or on talk radio or on the internet, these like really exaggerated stories and just outright lies about what's happening in schools. And so I would just theorize that any of the negative percentages there that has a lot to do with the parents who've bought into those narratives that get people outraged and get clicks and get more views, even though they're complete exaggerations of the truth.
And let me actually add something on that, Todd, because I totally agree. And in some cases, you have people like speaking in like a school board meeting, and they don't have kids in that school district, right. Or B, sometimes they're from another place and they were bussed in to be, like there's really manufactured outrage about our schools, whereas actually if you go to the polling again, it shows no, the parents support what's going on in our schools. And frankly, we need to do more honest talk about race and more honest talk about gender and really ensure that we have those windows and mirrors for all our kids that Natasha was talking about.
Absolutely. So the SCEA is so happy to partner with you on this to bring these issues to the forefront, because our members really care about what's happening in their classrooms. We see so many vacant classrooms without a certified teacher, and we hear the morale of teachers at an all-time low. And instead of the state legislature doing things that would improve teacher recruitment and retention, their focus is on things like this, which are just wedge divisive issues that they are utilizing to try to, I guess, get votes or to shore up their base or whatever the motivation is there. But clearly, this kind of legislation is not going to improve the ability for us to attract people into the profession and keep them there, because you're going to micromanage them and make them worried anytime they do talk about the truth in a history class, or we read a novel that's a realistic reflection of things that folks have experienced that may not look like you or may look like you. And so it's really alarming. And I think a lot of teachers have this on their radar and are just hoping that it won't pass. And that they will look at something like teacher pay or protecting planning time instead. I'm thinking of a lot about what Cornel West said, which is, he said, justice is what love looks like in public. And when I dig down to the core of what these issues are, I would ask people to reflect on, what does love look like in policy? Does H5183 look like love in public policy? Or does it look like fear, hate, ignorance? And let love guide us to the right types of policy. But I do have some questions. Chanda, what can folks do in the classroom to continue teaching truth, even under this sort of dark cloud of this legislation and sort of zeitgeist of anti folks?
So before I answer that, I kind of want to piggyback kind of on what you said and address one thing about teachers leaving the profession, because it's something that I'm passionate about and that I've been working on, is educator mental health right now in this state. And that's another thing that's driving teachers out, without having the opportunity to be the professionals that they are and teach students according to what they need, without being stressed out about more paperwork that they'll have to fill out potentially due to these bills, and having more non-instructional tasks added to their plate. I'm going to share a couple more statistics that I wrote down, and it's important to know that right now is a study that found that teachers are twice as likely to experience job-related stress and 3 times as likely to have symptoms of depression than the general adult population. These are our teachers, and we wonder, why they're leaving. So, switching gears to talk about some of the instructional strategies or things that I do in the classroom to teach truth. The number one thing is making sure that we create a community in our classroom. And one of the ways that I did that, I taught in an inner city school, and my students dealt with, some of the issues of the street and gang violence. So I was like, okay, what is driving them to be a part of this pack? So creating that family environment inside of their classroom. I talked to Miriam and Natasha about this before. I said, in my science class, I created a family by creating the Geek Squad, which stood for great experimenters exhibiting knowledge of science, and we stayed lit, which is leading, inquiring about the world, and teaching what we know. And what that did, students looked at one another as brothers and sisters. So I was like, if one of your brothers or sisters or someone else in the class came without pencil, paper, instead of y'all, clowning them, offer them something. Say, how can I help you? Develop empathy and love, because you never know what that student is going through. And that's something that supported, created a positive classroom culture in my classroom. Another thing that I did as a teacher is establish these cogens, and scholar Dr. Christopher Emden talks about this, and cogen is short for cogenerative dialogue. And that's where you choose diverse groups of students in the classroom. So you could pick one student that is, Hispanic, one student that's African-American, or you can divide it up by socioeconomic status, whatever it is, your identifier, and have secret conversations with them about what you can improve as a teacher to create a better classroom culture. Maybe some of the actions that you're doing are triggering to that student. You're talking too loud or yelling, and you take the things that they share with you in love, because ultimately we're here to serve students, meet their needs. Just take it in love and make those adjustments so that you can make the entire classroom culture better. So definitely looking into creating cogens and ensuring that student voice, diverse voice, is a part of the way that you run your classroom, the way that you set up the protocols that students are experiencing. And one of my favorite things, I'm a science teacher, but I also embed historical context into my curriculum. And that is what drew me in. As a student, when I was able to go to the library and pick up a book, one of my favorite books was Amazing Grace or Boundless Grace as a child, that had a story in it that I saw someone that looked like me with, Afro puffs. I was able to connect with that story and excited to write about it. So in my STEM classes, one time I had a group of all girls. And I was like, okay, how can I connect this group of all girls to this curriculum so that they can see themselves here? So I brought in women in STEM and discussed their discoveries and what they did so that they felt like they belong. And we also talked about like challenging historical contexts, such as medical apartheid. And in those topics, such as mitosis and meiosis, when we're talking about cell division and the development of vaccines, I would talk about slaves, Henrietta Lacks, how her cells were stolen back in the day. And in medicine, they're using them to create vaccines, the vaccine for COVID-19, but her family still doesn't have health insurance, some of them, and they were never able to repay her for the things that she contributed to society. And we discuss that, have dialogue, inquire about what should have been done, what policies have been put in place since then. And just one more thing that's close to home in South Carolina is the Modern Mothers of Gynecology. Dr. J. Marion Sims, he is the father of modern gynecology. And in order to perfect his gynecology strategies and techniques, he pretty much operated on women of color without pain medication. And we discussed that in class, and the kids give their opinions, and understanding that this man's statue is on the State House grounds in South Carolina, that creates a dialogue for, why that is and what we could do about it. That is teaching truth, and that is inquiry. That's taking my science class to the next level and connecting it to the culture of South Carolina. And we don't need that taken away from our kids.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chanda. And so it's this idea that somehow when you say that's automatically going to bring shame on somebody. Like, I don't even understand that. It's really just, let's identify the mistakes we've made as human beings, the mistakes we've made in this country, in this state, in our communities. What are the historical mistakes that we've made, so that we can learn from them and not repeat them? And if we just deny them and say we're going to only talk about, we're just going to celebrate all the positive things and everything that we've done right, there's no learning that takes place there. It's just a patting ourselves on the back. And we should do that, but if we're not also really taking a deep look at the horrors that have been perpetrated against various groups of people, against women and people of color and indigenous peoples, we're just doomed to repeat those same mistakes as human beings. And I think that's tragic. And we're seeing, when you deny people truth, you're seeing the outcome of that is happening with Russia and Ukraine right now. The people of Russia do not have access to the full truth about their government. And you're seeing the atrocities that take place when that happens. We can't allow that to happen. We can't deny people the truth. Natasha, I'd like you to talk pragmatically about what educators can do to advocate with their state legislators on these issues.
Yeah. And so, Chanda, thanks for all of that. I see why you were the teacher of the year, because that sounds like a really awesome classroom to be in. And like, I would have loved to sit in your science class and have that access in my own educational experience. So thank you for what you've done for our kids.
Thank you.
As far as what we as educators can do so Chanda shared a little about what we can do in the classroom, but our voices also matter in the state legislature. Our voices also matter beyond that realm of just the classroom of our schools. And so one thing that we can do, there are a lot of things, but one thing that we can do as educators is, I know we're busy, we may not have time to go to the State House. That is a great thing to do, but we have to teach our kids. One thing we can do is submit written testimony for a hearing. So for these bills, and as this session will be closing on May 12th, and so hoping that HB 5183 doesn't move forward, but there's still space and time to submit written testimony. All that is your opinion as an educator about why this bill is not beneficial for kids. You're in the classroom, you can use your voice, you can use your stories, you can share like your experience about why this would not make things better for children, because that's what the claim is that this bill would do. Share why you don't agree with that. If you have time, you can attend and advocate at committee hearings. There are opportunities to give public testimony where you can go before your state representatives and speak and share with them your stories about what is actually happening in your school, in your classroom, and what kids actually need. You can set up a meeting with your representative. If you don't want to go and testify before the whole committee, you can go and meet one-on-one with your representative. I know Chanda right now is doing work for representative, and she was saying that like representatives love to hear from educators. They want to hear your voice. Chanda, anything you want to add on that?
Absolutely. I found before I came up to Capitol Hill, I didn't understand how to communicate with my legislators and my representatives and senators. But as I'm operating the work on the receiving end, seeing the letters that are coming in from health professionals, from scientists, from police officers. And I'm like reading through these letters. I was like, where are the teachers? So we love to hear from educators. And guess what? Every time that you send a letter to your representative in the House or in the Senate, they have to reply to you, whether it's a phone call or anything, they're supposed to reply to you. So make sure that you ask questions, make sure that you share, inquire anything concerning education. Make sure that you share those opinions, especially when it relates to this legislation, not only at the state level, but also at the federal level, because, you know, I saw a lot of the trickle down effect when I heard about some of these bills in the Education and Labor Committee. It wasn't, you know, a few weeks later, a few months later, that is when I saw them being introduced in, you know, different states across the nation. So this is the opportunity and this is the time. And don't be afraid to testify, even at the state level. I did it. I was a third-year teacher working a part-time job at Best Buy. I remember writing my speech while there were no customers at the cash register to prepare myself to talk about the importance of, I think back then it was equitable teacher evaluations. But for this case, you know, this is something that we're passionate about as well. This time, sit down and write about what you would like to say about teaching truth in schools and how important it is for you as a professional to be able to continue to teach your classroom, to support your students. So yeah, that's all I'll add.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll add, like you said, email or call, get your voice out there. Your voice matters. Don't ever think that, oh, I'm just a teacher. You're not just a teacher. That's a big deal. You are educating our nation's next generation, the people who are going to be leading. Your voice matters. You can tag your state legislator in a social media post, put the hashtags. There's hashtag teaching truth, hashtag honest education. Use those hashtags at them and get their attention. From what I've heard, they are watching social media. If you at them, they will see that. If you want to do something a little more less direct, if you're like, I'm not sure that I'm ready to reach out directly to someone who's in my General Assembly yet, you can share your story on social media about why teaching truth to students is important. Tag your friends, just raise awareness. sit down, post your story about what you've seen in your classroom, what you've taught them, and the reaction of your students, the power of seeing students see themselves and how engaged they were and why you want to make sure that's not taken away. That matters as well. And then the last thing I will do, I know we say this all the time, we hear about it everywhere, but vote. That is not to be undervalued. If you don't like what someone who is your representative, a person who was voted into office, is doing, vote them out. That is why we have this system in this way. Use your vote to point the state legislature in a direction that you want to see it go, that benefits you and your students. And so those are all things that are really powerful. And I would say don't underestimate the power of raising your voice and making sure you're heard. One thing I would say is that there was an educator, a high school teacher in Indiana, who gave a really powerful testimony during the hearings for one of these divisive concept bills in Indiana. And the bill was defeated. His testimony went viral. Everyone was watching it. It was super powerful because he's in the classroom with the students every single day. And the questions he asked and the things he posed to the legislature, there was really no response that they could give to devalue what he was saying. And so again, your voice matters, especially in this conversation, because this is what you do daily. And so, yeah, just want to encourage all the educators, elevate your voice, use it.
Thank you. Yeah. And one of the goals that I have in my work with the SCEA is to provide platforms for people to use their voices like we're doing tonight. So if you're out there and you want to speak out about this, we have a blog, we have podcasts, we do these live streams regularly. So if you have an idea for things you want to share, we encourage you to use your voice, and we'll give you platforms to do that. Miriam, a lot of people come to the SCEA, and a lot of our members check in with us like, what are my rights here? Like, what are my rights in this space? So could you, for teachers who might be worrying a little bit about this legislation that's coming on, what would you say to them in terms of what their rights are?
Yeah, thanks, Todd. That's a really good question, because we're hearing that too from the educators that we're working with, and there are a couple things. First of all, a bill that's pending is not law. So H5183 or whatever it is, you don't have to worry about that yet. That is not law. So that does not restrict your ability to do anything right now. We're trying to keep it from getting enacted so that hopefully it won't restrict anything you do. But right now, it can't restrict anything you do because it's not enacted yet. So don't worry about that. There is, as Natasha said, there's a thing that was in the budget last year, but that runs out at the end of June. And so as long as that's not renewed, that doesn't restrict anything you do either. In terms of what you do in the classroom, there are standards. Chanda was talking about this. There are, South Carolina social studies, college and career ready standards, so you have standards in your state that if you're following those and you're following the curriculum aligned to the standards, then you should be in good stead. And those standards include information about many of the topics that we've talked about tonight. Obviously you always want to make sure content is age appropriate. You're a professional teacher, you know how to do that. You want to make sure it's, that if you're planning on discussing a topic that may be considered a little more controversial, hopefully you're in, at least especially since COVID, in regular communication with your parents. And so, make a part of your regular communication with parents things that you're going to cover and why, make sure that they understand why this is an important topic to cover. It's aligned with the standards, and it's really important that people understand this. So, so do some explanation. And again, if you think it's going to be a controversial issue, maybe give a heads up to your principal. You want your principal to have your back. And so that's important as well. And, if there's some kind of controversy that's raised about something you've done in the classroom, you have a wonderful organization, the SCEA, that can help. You can call them. They can help address challenges that arise as a result of something you've done in the classroom. And then in terms of the actual advocacy around the legislation, so that was, in terms of teaching truth in the classroom, in terms of what you do as an educator to advocate, you want to do it on your own time. You want to do it outside of school and with your own resources, your own computer or phone or whatever. You don't want to do it with school resources, but what you do on your own time with your own resources is your First Amendment right. So you have a right to speak out on these issues. It may be in a local school board meeting. It may be in a state hearing like we were talking about. It may be with your representative to urge them to vote no on H 5183. So you have a right to do that on your own time with your own resources. Absolutely. That is your First Amendment right to speak out as a citizen. You want to make sure that you're not, that you're not using school resources. You're not doing it on school time, but otherwise you're fine doing advocacy on this. You are a citizen. You are allowed to speak out. If you end up joining students in some kind of off-school event that relates to the policy, you just want to make sure you're not using your position as a teacher of those students to influence the students in any way. So, you don't want to be like ginning students up to do things. But if they are doing something on their own and you happen to be joining them, again, on your own time, that's okay. There is a great Know Your Rights document that for South Carolina that we'll share the link with, and SCEA will share the link, that talks a little bit about understanding what your rights are. But there's tons that you can do in the classroom, and there's tons that you can do for advocacy on these bills outside of school hours and without school resources.
And I'll add to that, Miriam, one really excellent opportunity to do that advocacy. We are going to have in May our 30 days of hashtag Teaching Truth social media campaign. Again, just trying to take back the narrative and say, this is not something scary. This is not something that doesn't need to happen. We actually do need to teach our students the truth. And so every day for 30 days in May, we are going to be highlighting a different educator and their story about the power of teaching truth. We still need a few more submissions. So if there are any educators who would like to share their story and want to be highlighted, we would love to do that. We can share that information with Todd as well and figure out how to share that. Or you can email us at teachtruthecra@youthlaw.org, and we can connect with you there as well. So would love to have South Carolina educators featured because there's awesome work happening in the state and we want to highlight you for what you're doing.
Awesome. Yeah. If you email me those resources, I'll put them in the comments and then we can maybe post them as well. Final question for all of you. We're running out of time. I was thinking about the title of this live stream, which is Teaching Truth in South Carolina. And I used to teach media literacy to my broadcast journalism students. And I was seeing this kind of coming. I think some folks, some philosophers and stuff were predicting this as the internet became a powerful thing into the mid to late 90s and then ubiquitous throughout the early 2000s and then social media. And what's been liberating about the internet is there's no gatekeepers. Like, we don't have to go to CBS to broadcast what we're doing tonight. We're broadcasting ideas. We didn't need anybody's permission. And so that was a wonderful and liberating thing about this technology. And we're trying to actually get truth out there. The problem is that without gatekeepers, anybody can jump in on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter, on and start promoting ideas that aren't the truth. And so we're almost living in this, like, we've opened this Pandora's box of falsehoods without being equipped with the critical reasoning skills that are necessary to to discern between truth and fiction. And so I almost feels like we're in this sort of post-truth world, and that it really requires all of us, your organization, the SCEA, educators, to counter the misinformation with correct information and truth, and to insist upon that in our schools. So this is a critical inflection point, I think, in our state and in our country. Are we going to anchor into the truth and insist upon it, or are we going to allow the truth to continue to deteriorate and crumble to the point where we can't even agree on what's true anymore, on what's happened historically to us, on what is reality? I don't need to go off on a rant there, but do any of you have any comments on that as we go to closure?
Well, I have one comment, which is just the teaching truth in the classroom. So ensuring that students understand the full complexities of our nation's history, our current realities. That actually helps students develop the independent thinking and reasoning that will enable them to be more effective users of the internet, more effective discerners of, well, what's the source there, and what bias might they have? And, understanding a more full and complex view of our nation and of the world is helpful in giving students the tools that they need to be informed citizens.
Yeah. And just to add to that, like the quote says, we're preparing students for jobs that don't yet exist in the future. In order to do that, we have to train them to critically think. And we need representation, diversity, inclusion, because those diverse perspectives, that is what creates the innovation. And, for so long, without having all of these voices in the room, in the places, we're falling behind as we try to compete globally. So we need our students of color. We need our students with diverse backgrounds. We need our students that that grew up in poverty, because they have different perspectives that they can bring to the table, bring to our country, so that we can get ahead and so that we can move forward in our education system. It's like, if we continue to shut out those things, shut out those stories, our students will continue to be behind. And, this is a matter of life and death for some of our students. They need this education. They need the opportunity to use their voices. They need the opportunity to be who they are, so that they're ready to go into their college or go into the careers that they choose to pursue, confident and boldly, and knowing that they received a quality education from the phenomenal teachers across the state of South Carolina.
Thank you. Natasha, final word?
I'll just add, I'll second all that and saying there's no group of people who are more better positioned to ensure that our students have access to all of that than educators. Yep. And so the final thing I'll say is I just encourage everyone, elevate your voice. Your voice matters. Don't forget that. If you don't take anything else from this conversation, remember that there is so much power in your voice. And so I just want to encourage everyone to speak up, speak out, and make sure that you are speaking on behalf of what is best for students. And that's truth.
Well, thank you so much. I want to thank all three panelists tonight, Chanda Jefferson, Miriam Rollin, and Natasha Wilkins. Thank you so much for your time, your energy, your passion for this really important subject, and for illuminating so much important information for our educators to be aware of as they face this issue moving forward. And just as a reminder to everybody who is paying attention, we didn't plan it out this way, but the House did pass H 5183, the AntiTruth Education Censorship Bill. Because that bill didn't make crossover, we mentioned this earlier, but if you're just tuning in, for the Senate to even consider the bill and assign it to a committee, they have to have 2/3 of the senators to vote yes. So if you want to take action, if you've been watching this and you're like, I want to do something, what you can do, I put in the comments a link. It's the scea.org/ledge-contact. You can find out who your legislators are, and you can find out their phone numbers, and you can contact them and tell them to vote no on 5183. No on 5183. That's something simple that you can do tonight. It's something, or tomorrow, whenever you're watching this, something simple you can do. And then, of course, we invite all of you to join the SCEA, because as powerful as your voice is alone, it's even more powerful when we speak collectively, when we speak as one together and say, no, we don't want to part of 5183. So we encourage you to join the SCEA.org. Go to join the SCEA.org. And you can join right now with no dues until September, because it's our early enrollment period. And one final reminder, we are going to have another similar discussion to this on May 11th. Rick Whitmore is going to host his final roundtable. It's going to be called Honesty in Education. We're going to tackle similar issues with some different guests, and we invite you to join us for that May 11th roundtable. But again, on behalf of all my guests and on behalf of everybody at the SCEA, thanks to my guests, and thank you for watching. And we hope that you will join us in this movement, the SCEA. Thank you. Have a great evening.